This is Kick-Ass Politics. I'm Ben Mathis. Hi there, folks. Ben Mathis with a quick announcement. It's been about a year since I started Kick-Ass Politics, and we're halfway to 100 episodes, which now that we're doing 2 a week should put us at sometime in May. And if you want to help me celebrate, then go to our GoFundMe campaign and contribute $50 to our end-of-the-year fundraising campaign. I'm trying to raise our entire production budget for the coming year by the end of this year, 2015. And it's getting down to the wire, so I need your help. Go to gofundme.com/kickasspolitics or click on the donate link on our website at kickasspolitics.com and give $50 to celebrate our 50th episode. Then you can take pride in the fact that you're part of what I'm doing here and help us get to 100 episodes within just a few months. Another neat way you can help out, believe it or not, is just by doing your holiday shopping. If you decide to order anything through Amazon.com, doesn't matter if it's books, electronics, toys, jewelry, whatever, before you do that, go to the sponsor page on our website at kickasspolitics.com and click on the Amazon link, and then do your shopping. If you do that, Amazon will kick us a little coin here at Kick-Ass Politics for every dollar you spend. It's like giving 2 Christmas gifts for the price of one. But only if you go to Amazon through our website at kickasspolitics.com. You're going to do your Christmas shopping anyway, and this way you'll get the satisfaction of ordering that perfect gift for your kids, your wife, your best friend, whoever. And at the same time, you'll be supporting Kick-Ass Politics and helping to keep us running over here. Just go to the website at kickasspolitics.com and click on the Amazon link on our sponsor page. It's that simple. And while you're there, check out some of the other cool holiday deals from our partners on the sponsor page. So thanks for helping me get to 50 episodes, and I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And now, enjoy the show. Hi there. I'm Ben Mathis, and welcome to Kick-Ass Politics. A couple of weeks ago, I had Stephen Lee Myers on the program, and we talked about his book, The New Tsar, The Rise and Reign of Vladimir Putin. In his estimation, Vladimir Putin is a man motivated by genuine Russian nationalism and a deeply held worldview focused on bringing order out of chaos. He also said one day Vladimir Putin would like to step down and quietly retire. Well, today, I'm giving equal time to the opposition with my guest who says, no way. Vladimir Putin will hold on to power for dear life, even if it means taking Russia and the whole world down with him. He says Vladimir Putin believes in only one thing, Vladimir Putin. And he says Putin is a ruthless dictator who shows frightening similarities to Adolf Hitler. And believe me, this guy would know, because my guest today has been leading the call to end the Putin era in Russia. He even ran for president against Vladimir Putin's hand-selected puppet, Dimitri Medvedev, in 2008. He's Garry Kasparov. If you know that name, then you probably either follow Russian politics or you play chess, because Garry Kasparov spent 20 years as the world's #1 ranked chess player, and by most accounts, he's probably the greatest chess master of all time. In 2005, he retired from professional chess and became the most high-profile and outspoken activist against the authoritarian regime of Vladimir Putin. His 2008 campaign for president of Russia ended with him withdrawing from the election in protest after a constant stream of dirty tricks, violence, and outright election fraud orchestrated by the Putin machine made it impossible for him to stand for election. Then, in 2012, he was arrested, beaten up, and questioned after a peaceful protest outside of a Moscow courthouse. That's when his friend and fellow activist Boris Nemtsov advised him to do what's best for his family and carry on the fight from outside of Russia. Incidentally, that's the same Boris Nemtsov who was assassinated in Moscow just last February. Garry Kasparov now lives in self-imposed exile in New York, where he serves as chairman of the Human Rights Foundation. He's written a new book called Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the World Must Be Stopped. Today, he's coming on the show with a dire warning that Putin has gone from being Russia's problem to being a problem for the entire region. And if not stopped, he's going to become a very dangerous problem for the whole world. Coming up with Garry Kasparov in just a moment.
From Hollywood to Washington, it's time for Kick-Ass Politics. And now here's your host, Ben Mathis.
My guest today is Garry Kasparov. For 20 years, he was ranked the #1 chess player in the world. And then in 2005, he set aside his chessboard to get into politics and become a political activist. His new book is Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Garry Kasparov, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I loved the book. I wish that it weren't necessary for you to have written a book like this. It really is a call to arms and a wake-up call for the West, because I'm assuming this book probably isn't even being published in Russia for obvious reasons. Who is your intended audience for this book?
Yeah, absolutely. The Western audience should hear the story and to understand the dangers we're facing now, and also to understand how many mistakes were made after the end of the Cold War, and to also learn about missed opportunities that could change our world for better in the last 25 years. But it's also a very important book for Eastern European nations. Almost every country in Eastern Europe signed a contract to release the book in their native tongue, because Eastern Europeans, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, Finns, they're well aware about the dangers from Putin's Russia today. The book has 3 stories in one. It's about the rise and the fall of Russian democracy, from Gorbachev's retreat from Eastern Europe to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It's a personal perspective of me as a witness, and in many cases as a participant in the events described in the book. But also, and probably this is the most important part of the book, it's a story about what the West did, or to be more precise, didn't do, to prevent these unfortunate events from happening. I think if we are now, while facing this new crisis, what I call it's a new winter, geopolitical winter, with dark and dangerous times ahead of us, if we follow the famous motto from the great books and the TV show Game of Thrones. If we understand that this threat is real, we have to look back to analyze mistakes that were made to work out a successful strategy to prevail.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that, because I don't think there are many people in this book who escape blame, whether it's in the West or in Russia. What are the mistakes that were made early on in Russia's experimentation with democracy?
Well, I think many of mistakes that I pointed out in the book, you can argue they were almost inevitable, because we dealt with such a brand new situation and things happened so quickly. The Soviet Union collapsed, the Berlin Wall went down, the evil empire has disappeared, and it's all within a few years. So after decades of the Cold War, where everybody believed that it would last for many more generations, suddenly the world had to deal with a brand new situation, with new challenges, and it looked, as the history was over. A very famous best-selling book of Francis Fukuyama in 1992 was titled "The End of History," and
Right.
I have to say that almost everybody, including myself, shared the sentiments. Because we thought, okay, it's time now just to celebrate, just to relax, because evil has been defeated. Yes, it was defeated, but what we learned, that evil doesn't disappear. It could be buried for a while under the rubbles of the Berlin Wall, but eventually it sprouts, and it will be haunting us if we lose our vigilance and if we are not coming up with a strategic vision for the future. 91-92 was a unique moment in history where the free world, led by the United States, could come up with new ideas how to reorganize the world, most importantly, how to reorganize the United Nations, and to change it from like an entity that was built to freeze conflicts into something that could solve problems. And this new organization had to be based on the fundamental values that help the free world to be triumphant in the Cold War against totalitarian Soviet Union.
Well, going back to that moment in the early days of democracy, you say that part of the problem was Russians' expectations of democracy. You say that in 1991, Russians expected ballot boxes to operate like ATM machines.
Absolutely.
Explain what you mean by that.
Russians, or to be more precise, Soviets, because at that time there was Russia and other Soviet republics. They grew up, in a country that was divided from the free world by the Iron Curtain, and at one point, almost everybody recognized the shortcomings of the Soviet system, and all people knew about the free world could be explained, just in two simple terms. One, democracy means people go and vote and they can change the government. Two, the living standards in the free world much higher than in the Soviet Union. So it's a simple equation. In the minds of millions and millions and millions of my compatriots, that created a very simple, connectivity. So if we go to vote, if we, remove one-party system, without being bothered of all these details like, the branches of government, the checks and balances, that was too complicated. Simply, we vote, and then we should have a better life. Now, people in Russia voted many times, voted for Yeltsin, for reforms, but unfortunately, contrary to their expectations, the living standards for many of them, many millions, not improved, even worse, have been steadily deteriorating.
Which created the atmosphere for Putin.
Which created, it's an angry society that, couldn't understand what was wrong, and people blamed Yeltsin, people blamed reforms, not recognizing the fact that reforms actually helped to create a foundation for Russian economy to recover after financial collapse in 1998. The highest growth of GDP in Russia was in the year 2000, the year Putin took over, more than 10%, despite the fact that oil was roughly $20 a barrel at that time. But when Putin took over and it began its triumphant rise to something like $150 a barrel, it helped, to allocate funds that could be spent on improving the living standards in Russia. And suddenly, people saw that, this simple equation worked. And at the same time, the Russian middle class, could breathe with a sign of relief. Life looked solid, good, promising, and minor problems like, the steady elimination of the free speech, and elections being turned into something, a mere formality. They didn't bother majority of Russians because, again, it seemed to be, so far away from the sort of regular benefits that they could receive from the regime.
Yeah, it seems that they've traded freedom or the promise of freedom for security. And, as Thomas Jefferson once said, if you trade freedom for security, you'll end up with neither eventually. So.
Yeah, I don't think it was, a simple trade because it didn't happen overnight. Right. That's what's always happens with dictators, successful dictators. They don't create, just a new situation. Just it's changing the system of governance overnight. They do it step by step, gradually. And it's people just don't feel that something changed so dramatically. But one day, after many years of this gradual power grab by a dictator and his cronies, suddenly one day you realize you live in a different country.
Yeah, and one of the things that you say that I thought was pretty insightful is you say that dictators are much better at learning from history than Democrats with a small d are.
Yes, it's the dictators. They always look at the history, and they try to actually learn from the mistakes made by their predecessors. Though again, from history, we all know that no matter what dictator does, I mean, he will end miserably. But they always try to come up with sort of new algorithms to boost their staying power, because you have new technologies. It's the geopolitical situation always changes, and they are much faster in reacting to the changes, because they don't have to ask the Congress about extra funding. They don't have to be bothered about the press criticism. They don't care about next elections, because it's all fixed. It's all under control. But dictators, they cannot afford the long-term strategy, because long-term strategy means lasting institutions, and the entire concept of full-blown one-man dictatorship is to sort of boost credibility for just one person.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you say that Vladimir Putin is not thinking that far ahead. He's focused entirely on his survival, which goes against this very trite saying that pundits tend to say these days, is that Vladimir Putin is playing chess while Obama's playing checkers. He's really not that many moves ahead of us, is he?
Absolutely. I always, want to rush to the defense of the integrity of my game, because Putin does not play chess. The game of chess is not for dictators, because the game of chess, is transparent, 100% transparency. You can see the resources of your opponent. Putin is very good in playing poker. This is the game for dictators. The game where you can bluff. The game that that when information is hidden, and you can win with a weak hand. It's all about your ability to bluff. And KGB guy, he was a very good operative. He knows how to bluff. He knows how to blackmail. And he can gauge the caliber of the opposition. And he found out very quickly that the opposition, from the free world was fairly weak, without a resolve. Whether it was, Bush 43, and of course, moreover, with Obama's administration, there was such a fear to destroy the status quo. Always looked for Russia as a potential partner. Let's find common ground. Let's find common ground. Yeah. And Putin kept doing things, invading the Republic of Georgia and doing this and that, but challenging America all the time. And every time they came back saying, "Oh, how about finding this common ground?" And Putin realized that he could go as far as invading neighboring country, Ukraine, and he hasn't, he was not met by the adequate response even at that time. So what is important in my view is actually to start playing chess with him, to make sure that we play the game where democracy has a fundamental advantage, because democracy relies on lasting institutions. We can come up with a strategy that will win this war, because we're facing an opponent who is very dangerous. You may even argue desperate, because he has no life outside of Kremlin, so he will fight for power. But he's not nearly as powerful as the Soviet Union. And for those who are arguing that Putin is so dangerous and we should, appease him, not confronting him, I could remind them that in 1948, for instance, Joseph Stalin was far more dangerous. And if Harry Truman's administration shared the attitude of appeasement, the world map could be very, very different. And of course, if Ronald Reagan played the same game as was played, for instance, by Carter administration before him, or as many at that time argued, was a wise policy not to tease Soviet Union, not to confront Soviet Union, but to find common ground, I could be still playing under the Soviet flag.
Well, yeah, and in using the poker analogy, you say that the West has a far better hand, but we're acting like we have a terrible hand, like we're playing a terrible hand.
Because in poker, it's having a strong hand doesn't mean that you're going to win. You need good nerves. Yeah. You have to be ready to call the bluff of your opponent. And Putin knows that the moment he raises the stakes, the West fold the cards.
Yeah, and the West tends to treat Russia with this timidity, like having an emotionally volatile relative at Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone's like, "Don't upset him. Be very respectful. Don't bring up this." And you say that this mentality is only going to make the problem much, much worse down the road.
I mean, if you want to know about true dangers from Putin's Russia, ask Estonians, Latvians, Finns, Poles. those who suffered under Soviet occupation and those who are very concerned and fearful, rightly so, about the rise of Putin's Russia and the threat that is coming from there, because Putin's in being desperate, could do whatever, even to cross NATO borders, if a Russian economy bankrupt at that moment where oil, say, is $20 a barrel, goes back to where it was when Putin took over. But dictators don't ask why. The question they ask, why not? And if they see an opportunity for them, they definitely grab, territories, because they have to demonstrate domestically to the in Putin's case, to the Russian public, the strengths, almost on a daily basis. Because the moment dictator looks weak, he'll be challenged. And it's not a democratic challenge. It's not about elections. He could be challenged by his own inner circle, because weak dictator is dead dictator. And Putin knows, learned this lesson of history. So that's why everything he does, helps Putin's propaganda machine to project the image of a macho president, Putin the indispensable, Putin the invincible, who defies America, Obama, European leaders on a daily basis and keeps winning. Even if he's not winning in real life, it looks on the picture that he's winning. One of the best, Putin's showdown was in New York when he met Obama at the General Assembly of the United Nations. I bet you that this reluctant handshake, Putin spent hours in front of the mirror practicing it, because next day Russian television demonstrated it as Putin in New York in the belly of the beast, had to shake Obama's hand, and next day Russian planes bombed American-backed opposition in Syria.
Right. He does seem to thrive on creating chaos in the world. Every time chaos breaks out, somehow he's there or he's ready to step in.
Absolutely.
Does he actually, in terms of his worldview or his foreign policy, does Vladimir Putin actually believe in anything, or is everything a bargaining chip to him? What is his calculus in Syria, Ukraine, and everywhere else?
He believes in his own survival. He believes Vladimir Putin, is Russia. As Adolf Hitler believed he was Germany, as Joseph Stalin believed he was Soviet Union, as Mao Zedong believed he was China. That's the moment, where dictator, it's mentally, absorbs the country, and he can throw the entire, military economic power of the country to secure his survival. And Putin knows that crisis is the only atmosphere where he can survive. He needs chaos. Because with this chaos, he can find, a new opportunity for him, a new move. Because now he becomes indispensable for Europeans. The France now is begging him to help. Obama, instead of isolating him, is trying to engage him. And when people say, oh, but that's what Putin did, it could hurt long-term interests. There is no long-term interest. It's all about survival today and being ready for the battle tomorrow. That's it. He doesn't care about Russia's strategic interests. He's willing to sacrifice it, for instance, by giving huge concessions to China, because that looks also good. He's had confrontation with the West, but at the same time he embraced China. It was not Putin who embraced China. China was hugging Putin and just squeezing more and more concessions out of him.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I'm curious then, since you brought it up, does the thawing of relations between China and Russia, which have always been kind of troublesome and sticky over many decades, does that concern you?
Look, it's the relations between Putin and Chinese. They're similar to the relations between Kerry's State Department and Russian Foreign Ministry. You cannot call it negotiations, because negotiations means you give and take. It's all one way. As much as Kerry gives up everything to Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Ministry, and basically keeps absorbing Russian agenda to the point where once I suggested that Lavrov should be appointed the Secretary of State to cut the middleman. Russia keeps giving up everything to China. China has been simply getting more and more, from cheap oil and gas to the territorial concessions, and also very, preferred trade deals, opportunities to invest and bring Chinese workers on Russian territories. And let's not forget, Chinese official policy views at least one third of Russian territory as a temporarily occupied Chinese lands. And you have the situation where on one side of the border, from Russian side, there are about 20 million people living from Novosibirsk to Vladivostok, which is more than half of Russia, Russia's territory. It's about 3,000 miles. And on the other side of the border, you have at least 250 million Chinese. And China has the long-term policy strategy. That's the difference. Strategy of gradually absorbing these territories and natural resources. So that's why, what we can see now is that at the expense of Putin's suicidal policies, China has been grabbing more power, and the United States, by giving concessions to Putin and propping up his stay in power, eventually beefing up Chinese ambitions.
Well, yeah, because the Chinese, what everyone knows about China wants resources. They're out for natural resources wherever they come, whether they come from dictators or third world despots or whatever, it doesn't matter. And Russia has the resources.
China has been heavily investing in Africa, in many African countries, and I've been traveling there promoting chess for education in these places. You could see that, it's great chunks of territories, simply, just controlled by Chinese. But Africa is far away. Russia is just, next door.
Right.
And China needs resources, but also it needs territories. It needs land for its population, for this fast-growing population. Now, by the way, they abandoned one-child policy. It'll be more Chinese.
Right.
And if you look at the map, tell me where they can move. In the south, there are overpopulated countries like India, Vietnam, Pakistan. On the east, it's ocean. On the west, desert. The north is the only direction, and there is Russia with vast natural resources and very few people.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a convenient trade-off. Their population is going through the roof, and the Russian population is plummeting.
Oh, except North Caucasus, where the demographic situation is different from the rest of Russia. Right. It's the territories, with majority is Muslim, and they definitely have a very different number of kids per family. So and we could see the steady growth of population in Chechnya and in neighboring republics in the North Caucasus, and that's another potential challenge because we have China on the east, and then we have radical Islam that has been steadily gaining power in the south of Russia. So I believe that longer Putin stays in power, less chances for Russia to have a peaceful or not very turbulent transition to a normal democratic society without losing huge chunks of the territory.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then I'll be back to talk more with Garry Kasparov. If my conversation with Garry Kasparov interests you, then you should read his new book, Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the World Must Be Stopped. And right now, you can download the audio version of this book for free with a special promotion for our listeners from audible.com. Just go to audibletrial.com/kickasspolitics for a free 30-day trial and a free audiobook download, which can be Winter is Coming by my guest today, Garry Kasparov, or any of Audible's 180,000 titles for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, iPad, or MP3 player. That's audibletrial.com/kickasspolitics. Or click on the sponsor link on our webpage to download the free audiobook of your choice. We're back, and I'm talking with Garry Kasparov about his new book, Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Garry, earlier, I said there are really very few people who escape blame in this book, to Obama, to Mikhail Gorbachev, Bill Clinton, and across the board, and to both Bush presidents. You have pretty strong criticism for a number of leaders in this book. With regard specifically to George W. Bush, though, it's interesting because you say there are two reasons why Vladimir Putin was given such a wide degree of latitude for 7 years during the Bush administration. The first being that he didn't want to have to walk back that statement that he made about seeing into Vladimir Putin's soul. And the second is 2 phone calls that Vladimir Putin made immediately following 9/11. What did Putin say in those 2 phone calls, and what did those 2 phone calls buy him?
I don't think it matters what he said. I believe that both phone calls to Bush 43 and Condoleezza Rice, they were very short, but they were symbolic. And Bush already made these famous statements about seeing Putin's soul through Putin's eyes after their meeting in June. So these calls reinforced Bush's belief that Putin could be an ally, and Putin recognized that Bush was quite sensitive. That's what he could learn from the first meeting when he told him the story of being baptized in secrecy, his hidden Christianity, the cross given by his mother. So he definitely played with W's feelings. And Putin had no doubts that the call, a very timely call, the first call from a foreign leader after 9/11 could win him, again, with no concessions, just a call, 1 minute, could win him a Bush's goodwill for years to come. And at that time, Putin knew he needed friends. That's it. Right. That's a first phase of dictatorship. To consolidate power inside the country, he needed friends in the free world. He needed to present himself for Russian public as a Democrat, as somebody who is legitimate, somebody who is supported by Bush, Blair, Berlusconi, Schroeder, Chirac, all the leaders of the free world. And the sort of the climax of these Putin's propaganda presentation was in 2006 in St. Petersburg, where Putin was a host of the meeting of the leaders of the free world. Great industrial democracies. There were 7, and then Russia was added 8 of them. And the Russian television used every opportunity to present Putin as one of the equals, and it basically destroyed any attempts of people like me or my friends and colleagues to criticize Putin's increasingly authoritarian rule, as we could see from inside, because even for Russians who had some sympathy to our cause, they could see Putin, Bush, and other leaders of the free world accepting Putin as one of the equals.
Yeah, we were so eager the whole world was, particularly America, to legitimize Vladimir Putin and Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And one thing that really bugs you is the G8, how quickly Russia was allowed into the G8, and you don't even call it G8 anymore. You say it's the G7. They never should have been in there.
Yes. Yeah, actually, it was given as an advance to Yeltsin, and also very critical about Clinton administration for missing many opportunities actually to stop some of the clandestine operations of Russian government under Yeltsin. Like the beginning of the nuclear cooperation with Iran. Very few people remember that it was in 1995 when the U.S. Congress passed a resolution tying future financial aid to Russia to the end of the transfer of Russian nuclear technology to Iran. And Bill Clinton decided that it was not important for national security and let Yeltsin continue it. And I could keep counting these moments where decisive and thoughtful action in the 90s could help us to avoid problems that right now are just banging in our door.
Yeah. Well, it was 2005 that you decided to retire from 20 years as chess champion of the world and to go into politics. Talk about what it was at that moment that made you want to become a political activist.
Yeah, I would strongly prefer to be called political activist, because the moment you say politics, your audience, thinks immediately about launching campaigns, fundraising, debates.
Self-serving.
We should tell the listeners that Vladimir Putin never participated in a single debate in his life. So the only debates in Russia is between protesters and riot police, and of course, riot police always wins. Yeah. And of course, elections. But elections in Russia was always a charade under Putin, and I reminded people time and again that our goal was not to win elections, but to have elections. And that was more like a making statement. I didn't expect be on a winning side, unlike I used to be in the world of chess. But it was a moral duty. I knew that the country was in trouble, and Putin could be the real danger for the future of Russia if he stayed in power for life, as I at that time suspected would be the case. And also, I wanted my kids to grow up in a free country, though it's not the case yet. But at least I have a clean conscience. I did what I could, taking a considerable risk that was also a problem for my family, and I ended up in exile now because going back to Russia for me will be a one-way ticket. But at the same time, I think it's important that people eventually realized that our prediction in 2006, 2007, 2008 about Putin eventually becoming a problem for everybody, from being Russian problem to be the problem for everybody. It's being realized, though it's later than I wanted, but with better, we say it's better late than never.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what goes on in cracking down on free elections over there. You ran against Vladimir Putin. What did you see as a candidate in terms of intimidation, in terms, the book talks about how meeting halls would suddenly be locked and you'd be shut out when you were supposed to give a speech, or you had youth who were coming and harassing you. And
but I would refrain using the word election because again, people here in America, they think about
the farce.
About the process. It was a farce, and at that time, by the way, Putin was still at the stage where he wanted to have friends in the free world. So that's why the attacks against us were, you may call them vegetarians compared to what they're doing now. Because, we could end up in jail for peaceful protest for 5 or 10 days, as I ended up once, and being detained many times and beaten by the police. Today, for the same crimes against the state, you would be in jail for 5 or 10 years, if not worse. So it was a moment where we desperately tried to actually prevent Russia from sliding into another dictatorship, and maybe with some help from the free world, we could have influenced Putin to walk away. In 2007, he was already probably the richest man on the planet, and he could simply, just walk away, getting international position as the, let's say, the president of International Olympic Committee, but he didn't want to leave the power because, he saw more opportunities for him to stay behind, as a puppet master with his appointee, Dimitri Medvedev, taking the presidential chair for 4 years. And then, Putin believed that, as again, every dictator before him, that he could be smart enough sort of to not only to beat his opponents, but also to trick the history.
Just earlier in the year, your comrade in arms, former Deputy Prime Minister Boris Nemtsov, was murdered just a few months ago inside of the Kremlin.
In front of the Kremlin.
In front of the Kremlin. How did you feel when that happened? He was a personal friend of yours.
An ally. It was really, really bad day. One of the worst days of my life because I couldn't believe when I heard this news. Not just were comrades in arms, we were friends, and Boris was a great man, a big man. It's not only just physically a big man, but also his imposing presence. And he was a former first deputy prime minister in Yeltsin's cabinet. Many believed he was, for probably a year in 97, 98, a potential successor for Yeltsin. And
Were you surprised or not surprised?
No, I was surprised, but it makes me, feel pain when I think about future of my country. If Boris could be Yeltsin's successor, it could be the president. I was not surprised because Boris was so critical of Putin. Maybe critical is understatement. He has been blasting Putin on a daily basis, and he was too proud to leave the country. And he actually recommended me, strongly advised me not to return in March 2013 when I received this kind invitation from the Russian Investigative Committee to show up and to talk about our political activities. And Boris said, look, if you enter this building as a witness. If you leave the building, you will be the suspect. So you'd better stay away, Gary. And I did, and I'm here. I'm alive. I'm free, and I could only wish that Boris followed his own advice, and we could fight together from afar.
Well, like you said, you're now living in New York in self-imposed exile. Do you find yourself still looking behind your back? Because Lord knows, no one is safe from Vladimir Putin, whether you're in London or anywhere.
What worries me that, I always struggle how to answer, because the answer is yes. Yeah, I should worry. I mean, I'm a rational man. I do understand that many of my friends and colleagues who also criticize Putin, they're no longer around. Yeah. At the same time, I'm in America. I'm quite far away, but looking at the very weak response from the Western leaders to Vladimir Putin's actions, I don't understand that. Just Putin could go anywhere with almost any actions now. But at the same time, look, Boris did it from Moscow, and he was a true hero. Look, I have to do it in relative safety of New York or Los Angeles.
Yeah. I'm a little afraid to ask this next question, because I'm afraid I'm going to put myself on the FSB's radar. But if Vladimir Putin, theoretically, let's suppose, was to die of a heart attack today, would that solve the problem? Or what would happen in Russia after that? If there were no Putin, theoretically.
Russia today is a full-blown one-man dictatorship, which is quite different from the former Soviet Union or China today, where we could see a powerful bureaucracy led by the Politburo or Central Committee of the Communist Party, and having these institutions, though I disapprove the ideology and the way they governed people in the Soviet Union or in today's China, it always gives a sense of stability, because people negotiate, there are lobbying groups, and they always try to make sure system survives. Vladimir Putin is a man of his own, and he controls power in Russia. It's like being a spine of the system. You take out a spine, nobody can replace it, because all groups they have been working around Putin, and the checks and balances were always connected to him. So that's why Putin's disappearance means chaos. But it will happen anyway. And for those who argue, okay, we should preserve Putin's in power, because if he goes down, things will change and it could be for worse. Yes, but longer he stays in power, worse is the outcome. So that's why, I will appreciate any dramatic end of Putin's rule. And as we know from history, it will be unpredictable, because we don't know how it happens. But the most important thing, he doesn't know how it happens.
Is he the most dangerous man in the world?
Today, absolutely, yes. Because while I'm not going to undermine the threat from ISIS or from stateless terrorists or from state sponsors, terror sponsors like Iran, but Putin has means to destroy this world many times over. He is in charge of Russian nukes, and if he is desperate and he is all powerful, and if we keep missing opportunities to encourage those within the system to rise against him, at one point he could be totally uncontrolled. And if he could see the end of his rule, which most likely will mean the end of his life, he could do something truly desperate.
When I look at him, I see an awful lot of similarities to Hitler. When you think of the mentality, his actions in Ukraine, I mean, some of them seem like they're straight out of Hitler's playbook. Is that an exaggeration? Is that being trite?
People are getting really, agitated when you compare Putin to Hitler, and they simply forget the fact that before Hitler became this despicable evil, and it's the greatest murderer in the history of human race. Though people in the Soviet Union or in China may disagree, or in Cambodia, so those who lived under the horrors of communism, but people tend to forget that in 1933, 1934, 1935, 36, 37, even 38, even maybe 39, there were moments where Hitler could be stopped. It was not easy. but it was the only solution to prevent massacre, the carnage of the World War II. So the same as Putin, every day he's offered new concessions. Every day of appeasement potentially creates a monster. Because so far, his actions are, as you correctly pointed out, are quite similar to what Hitler did in 35, 36, 37, 38. We're reaching the crucial point, and the one lesson from history. Because as you pointed out, dictators, they learn from history. But we should also remember, appeasement always killed more people than deterrence.
Yeah.
And unless we forget this lesson, we will not be able to find an adequate answer to these new threats to the free world, to peace and stability and prosperity, the threats that come from Vladimir Putin and the enemies of the free world, and that's why they must be stopped sooner rather than later.
Well, it's definitely time for a wake-up call, and I know you have to go. Before we go, I promised a good friend of mine, Dr. Joe Harasti, who's a huge chess fan. He asked me to ask you what happened with Deep Blue, which was the IBM chess computer.
So we played 2 matches. I won 1 match. I lost the second match. And then IBM dismantled the machine.
Really? Do you suspect something funny might have gone on there?
Look, I just quoted facts. So that's the no.
Okay.
If you want to end the conversation on a light note, I point out to people that Deep Blue is now in business because it has been making sushi in JFK in the airport. Every time I fly, from JetBlue terminal, I could see the sushi bar named Deep Blue.
Well, Garry Kasparov, thank you so much for joining me. The book is called Winter is Coming: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Garry, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks again to Garry Kasparov for coming on the show to talk about his new book, Winter is Coming, and you can order it at Amazon.com. I'll include a link in the show notes for this episode, as well as on the website at kickasspolitics.com. It's also available as an audiobook, which you can get for free through that special trial offer at audibletrial.com/kickasspolitics. Definitely go get it. You can follow Garry Kasparov at Kasparov.com, that's KASPAROV.com, or on Twitter at @Kasparov63. And if you're interested in the great work he's doing through the Human Rights Foundation, you can learn more at humanrightsfoundation.org. Don't forget, before you do your online holiday shopping this week, go to our sponsor page at kickasspolitics.com and make sure you click on our Amazon link before you start ordering. And then Amazon will give us a little something to support the show for every dollar you spend at Amazon.com this Christmas. You're going to shop for gifts anyway, so why not help the show out at the same time? And help us reach our end-of-the-year fundraising goal by donating to our GoFundMe campaign at gofundme.com/kickasspolitics. It's really important that we fully fund our production expenses for the next year, so I can put my energies toward great new guests, interesting topics, and producing more new episodes. Whatever you can give is going to help us get there, so just go to gofundme.com/kickasspolitics, and I will forever be in your debt, sir. Follow us on Twitter at @KAPolitics or visit Kickass Politics on Facebook. And as always, I welcome your comments and suggestions at comments@kickasspolitics.com. But for now, I'm Ben Mathis, and thanks for listening to Kick-Ass Politics. This podcast may not be reproduced without express written permission. Kick-Ass Politics is a trademark of Mathis Entertainment, Inc.